This question's for Charlie. It comes from Stephen Tedder in Atlanta. He's been a Berkshire shareholder for 10 years and says, you and your friend Li Lu have been very optimistic with respect to investing opportunities in China. BYD has performed spectacularly for Berkshire since its initial purchase in 2008 and is currently valued at $5.8 billion. The Daily Journal recently bought a large position in Alibaba after founder Jack Ma had been reprimanded by the Chinese Communist Party, and Ma's other company, Ant, was not allowed to proceed with its IPO. What are your current thoughts on China and whether the communist leaders will allow businesses with strong leadership to flourish in decades to come?
Well, I think that the Chinese government will allow businesses to flourish. It was one of the most remarkable things that ever happened in the history of the world when a bunch of committed communists just looked at the prosperity of places like Singapore and said, the hell with this, we're not going to stay here in poverty. We're going to copy what works. And they changed communism. They just accepted Adam Smith and added it to their communism. And said, now we have communism with Chinese characteristics, which is China with a free market with a bunch of billionaires and so forth. And they made that shift. They deserve a lot of credit. Warren and I are not quite as good at that as changing our minds in many cases.
Yeah.
And that was a remarkable change coming from such a place. And of course, it's worked like gangbusters. It had this enormous growth in the average income of the average Chinese. They've lifted 800 million people out of poverty fast. And there was never anything like it in the history of the world. So my hat is off to the Chinese. And I think they will continue to allow people to make money. They've learned it works. The Chinese, I loved what the guy said in the first place. I don't care whether the cat is black and white as long as it catches mice. That's my kind of talk.
In that list of the 20 most valuable companies, just 3 are Chinese. Now, if you're looking out 30 years, how many do you think will be Chinese? My guess is more, but I don't think they'll top the United States. But who knows? It's amazing what has been accomplished, and
yeah, really amazing.
And they found what works. I mean, there's nothing like finding something works in order to sort of reinforce ideas over time, and we'll see what happens. But I would bet there will be more than 3, but I will bet the United States has more than China has, too.
Gavin Smith from Berkshire, England, he asked, Mr. Munger is a champion of Chinese stocks. How concerned is he about Chinese government interference as seen recently with Ant Financial, Alibaba, and Mr. Jack Ma? What, for example, is to stop the Chinese government from simply deciding one day to nationalize BYD?
Well, I consider that very unlikely. And I think Jack Ma was very arrogant to be telling the Chinese government how dumb they were and how stupid their policies were and so forth. Considering their system, that is not what he should have been doing. And no, I don't think that. I think the Chinese have behaved very, very shrewdly in managing their economy, and they've gotten better results than we have in managing our economy. And I think that will probably continue. And sure, we all love the kind of civilization we have. I'm not saying I want to live in China. I prefer the United States, but I do admire what the Chinese have done. How can you not do it? Nobody else has ever taken a big country out of poverty so fast and so long. And what I see in China now just staggers me. There are factories in China that are just absolutely full of robots and are working beautifully. They're no longer using peasant girls to beat the brains out of our little shoe companies in America. They are joining the modern world very rapidly, and they're getting very skillful at operating. The other thing that's really remarkable, the last 30 years of China, they have had real economic growth at a rate for 30 years that no big country has ever had before in the history of the world. And who did that? A bunch of communist Chinese. Now that is really remarkable. So if you're studying finance, you got a lot of strange things to account for.
So Bob Riedenthal, who is a PhD 1979 from aeronautical engineering, asked, so how would you rate investing in China with the current political tensions? Or you invested in China through the ownership of American companies that do business in China?
Well, of course I'm invested partly in American companies that do business in China, including Coca-Cola. But I'm also invested very significantly in China through the management of Li Lu, whom the Munger family backed heavily when he formed a little private equity firm to invest in China. And he has had a very successful record, and that's made me follow very closely the leading companies in China. And of course, I've had very successful experience there. And I think it's likely to continue. The Chinese story is the damnedest thing that, it's the damnedest thing that ever happened to a big country in terms of economics. No other big country ever got ahead this fast for that long.
And does that say that sort of the politics don't matter so much, or?
Yeah, it does. That's a very interesting observation. What that shows is exactly right. Who would have guessed that a bunch of communist Chinese run by one party would have the best economic record that the world has ever seen? Of course it's extreme. And I think it proves that, it doesn't, we Americans would like to think that our free expression and allowing all kinds of opinion and all kinds of criticism of the government is totally essential part of the economy. And what the Chinese have proved is you can have a screamingly successful economy with a fairly controlling government. All the government has to do is create a lot of Smithian capitalism. And if you do that, having a sort of a controlling one-party government doesn't matter. That's not a fashionable thing to say, but I think it's true.
In 1860, GDP per capita in China was 600. In 1978, the year Deng Xiaoping took over, it was 300. Today, it hovers around 9,500. Never before in the history of mankind have we seen such a rapid eradication of poverty, pulling approximately 800 million people out of destitution. You are on record as a zealous fan of the Chinese work ethic and Confucian values system. As we can see from the deteriorating U.S. relationship with China, the Western world does not understand China. What can we do to increase knowledge, understanding, and appreciation of the Chinese civilization?
Well, it's natural for people to think their own civilization and their own nation is better than everybody else. But everybody can't be better than everybody else. You're right, China's economic record among the big nations is the best that ever existed in the history of the world. And that's very interesting. A lot of people assume that since England led the Industrial Revolution and had free speech early, that free speech is required to have a booming economy as prescribed by Adam Smith. But the Chinese have proved you don't need free speech to have a wonderful economy. They just copied Adam Smith and left out the free speech, and it worked fine for them. As a matter of fact, it's not clear to me that China would have done better if they'd copied every aspect of English civilization. I think they would have come out worse because their position was so dire and the poverty was so extreme. They needed very extreme methods, totalitarian methods, if you will, to get out of the fix they were in. So I think what China has done was probably right for China, and that we shouldn't be so pompous as to be telling the Chinese they ought to behave like us because they like because we like ourselves and our system. It's entirely possible that our system is right for us and their system is right for them.